Q95 as we tap into the life and times and expertise of our nature island Dominicans, at home and abroad. From our agriculture and industry to sustainable development, resilience and renewable energy, to the music, art, and entertainment industries. Join Dr. Simone, Mathieu, and guests every other Wednesday from 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. We examine where they came from, where they have been, where they are now, and how we can move forward together with our brothers and sisters at home and abroad to inspire and elevate our country, our economy, our people, and our youth to achieve excellence and success. Roots Connections on Q, every other Wednesday night, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Only on Q95, the big station.
Jacob is calling his children, where the price, so we want oh children home, to Zion, wanna go, take me home,
Good evening, Dominica, the Caribbean region, and the rest of the world. And welcome to another episode of Roots Connections on Q, right here on Q95, the big station. Wherever you're joining us from, whatever you may be doing at this time, it is wonderful to have you in our company for our number one program for navigating a world where change is the only constant. This is a program where we feature the change makers in our community, the visionaries among us who are not sitting by the sidelines talking about what we should be doing, but they're walking the talk and showing us what happens when we all turn our passion for Dominica and the Caribbean region into action for the development of our country, our region, and our people around the world, despite all the challenges and obstacles we face. So as we continue to witness how quickly the world around us is changing and evolving, here at Roots Connections, we are committed to engaging with our visionaries as we explore topics such as the changes we should be concerned about, the changes we should be taking advantage of, and what changes we need to make in order to move our Caribbean region and our people at home and abroad forward. So it is great. It is wonderful to be here with you. This is episode number 103 of Roots Connections on Q, and I am your host, Dr. Simone Mathieu. As always, we have another packed program for you as we continue to focus on opportunities to positively impact the Caribbean region and our worldwide Caribbean diaspora, especially as it relates to sustainable economic development of our beautiful islands. So today is no exception. We have another packed program for you as we will be discussing disaster capitalism, political victimization, and other challenges as the Caribbean navigates more intense natural disasters. And we're very proud to be joined by members of Stronger Caribbean Together Network. That is a new partnership that we have invited to be a part of the Q95 Roots Connections program. Our original panel will be joining us to explore what is the blueprint for mitigating the impact of natural disasters in our region. And so we say a special welcome and good evening to everyone who is joining us from the Stronger Caribbean Together Network. And I will tell you a little bit more about who they are in a little while, as well as those, again, who are joining us from the Caribbean region and the rest of the world. But before we get started, we always like to say a prayer for our islands and all the challenges that we continue to face in so many areas. We are grateful to you, our audience, whether you're joining us on Q95 radio or you're watching and listening to us on our various social media platforms. So if you're on Facebook, you can take a look at us at Q95 FM radio or push past 10. And if you're on YouTube, you can join in on Q95 FM radio. Don't forget to click the notification button, share the live, share the information, because we know that so many of us can benefit from the information that we're sharing on this program. Good evening to you, Lamby. It is always wonderful to have you in our company, holding down the fort in Dominica, and you will be taking the phone calls later in the program. Sherwin Norris, our engineer, Mr. G, and the rest of the Q95 family, good evening to you. So let's give a warm Roots Connections to our guests as we thank them for taking time out of their busy schedule to be here with us. So we're going to invite them to unmute their mics and to greet us with a brief introduction before we get into the discussion. So this being Roots Connections, just tell us where your roots stem, where you're from, and anything else you would like to share with the audience at this time as I go ahead and share the program to everyone who's waiting on the link to join in on the conversation. So we always like to go ladies first. So Dorriane, welcome to the program. Please tell us a little bit about who you are.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Dorriane Duncan. I'm born and raised here in Jamaica, in Kingston, Jamaica. Apologies, that's my dog joining the interview as well. And I'm an urban planner and a researcher, and I'm one of the founders of Island City Lab, which is a research organization that is really focused on understanding infrastructure and how that can impact us as citizens of the Caribbean.
Excellent. And I know you also have your fellow partner from Island City Lab, Jhordan. So if you can greet us with your introduction as well.
Hey, I'm Jhordan. I'm the other half of Island City Lab. My background is in architecture and urban design. As Dorriane mentioned, we do research rooted in Caribbean cities, the challenges that they're facing from, I think we'll take a social and technical perspective on the issues facing Caribbean cities. Happy to be here.
Yes,
so,
thank you.
Of course, I'm from Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica.
Yes, and we're very happy that despite the challenges you guys are experiencing, that you're able to join us today. And as a matter of fact, the first thing we're going to do as we kick the program off after the introduction is kind of get a sense of the conditions in Jamaica as of today. So thank you for being here. John, over to you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Simone. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Mussington. Presently, I'm a retired educator, as principal of a school. I'm also a member of the Barbuda Council, which is local government, Barbuda specifically in the nation of Antigua and Barbuda. A bit about my background. I am also a marine biologist, and I have over 30 years working as a consultant marine biologist, doing environmental impact assessments in Antigua and Barbuda and throughout the region. I've actually done some work in Dominica as well. When Dominica was doing their outfall into the ocean, I actually worked on that environmental impact assessment. So my background essentially is people call me an environmentalist, and that has connotations, but I prefer to say that I am an advocate for environmental matters, and we are all a part of this environment. And what we're looking at today, disasters, they're pretty much having to do with environment. Thank you.
Yes, excellent. So I can already tell we've called on the right people to have this very important conversation. And someone to our Dominican audience who needs no introduction, Mr. Athie Mathieu. Just for those who might not know you in the region, just tell us a little bit about who you are.
Athie Mathieu, Dominica, born 79 years ago. Next month I'll turn 80. And for most of my life, I've been involved with culture. I'm putting that first because normally it comes last. I'm a pan player. I play steel pan throughout the region and wherever I go in the world. And pan is one of the Caribbean inventions that in a big way has assisted in mitigating disasters in very interesting ways that is not talked about at all, but maybe we can get to that as part of the solutions. By training, I'm a soil scientist. an agronomist, and I've lived and worked most of that part of my life in the Caribbean, in the banana industry, and then later on in mixed agriculture. I am also an organizer of small farmers and peasants, which I've done in St. Lucia, in Jamaica as well, and in Dominica and Haiti. And that's where I began to develop a reputation as a troublemaker. And I'm happy to say that I have fought long and hard and successfully to maintain my credentials as a troublemaker in the Caribbean, which I'm hoping that my other panelists also fall into that category. I've been in government on 2 different occasions. In Dominica, a member of cabinet. The first time I got fired from attempting to do things that my colleagues felt were not becoming of a minister of government. And the second time, I walked out of cabinet and left the government because I felt that the cabinet was actually failing in its duty to keep faith with the mandate that they had shared with the people as part of a manifesto. I am a planner. I do national and integrated development planning. I've done that in Africa, in Southern Africa. I've done that in throughout the Caribbean, in several countries of Latin America. My life then has seen me exposed to a wide variety of cultures and locations. And whatever I bring to the table in any discussion like this is a reflection not just of my Dominicanness, it is a reflection of a Dominican person who has had the privilege and honor of traveling and working with people in many, many different countries of the world. And I'm happy to be able to be part of this discussion. And thank you, Simone, for bringing us together in this very timely and pertinent conversation as we confront some disasters in our region today. Thank you so much.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Athie, and happy birthday in advance.
Oh, happy birthday. You can join the party.
I would love to. Yeah, and I thought I would add someone else who is very versed on what we are speaking about to the conversation. He's Dominican by birth, living here out in the diaspora in the US, and he's a geologist by profession, very versed young man. Dominicans know him very well. Mr. Mathieu, welcome to the conversation. For those in the region who may not know who you are, just give us a brief introduction on who you are.
Thanks for the invite, Simone, and let me know if you guys can hear me because I just got my computer and joined in. But so the name is Mathieu. I am a professional geologist by profession. I have been working with environmental remediation here in the US for the past 21 years. This month gave me 21 years actually working in all things environmental related. My background, I was born and raised in Dominica. I grew up in the country area, I like to tell folks that, Simone, so when they hear, they know where we come from. I grew up raising pigs. I taught for geography at high school for a couple of years, working on the farm. And I think those experiences have shaped my observation and my understanding of life in the Caribbean, where we've been, where we need to be, and where we are, and where we need to go in the future. I also completed an MBA with a focus on energy management a couple of years ago. So that's something I've been diving into and getting more involved in. But I'm always happy to be here to share my views, because I think for the past 40, 50 years, when most of our Caribbean islands were coming out of colonialism, it was left up to people like me and you to develop plans, ideas, and put a path forward. And I think there is much more that can be done. Over the past few years, we've been doing the same thing, and there has to have out of the box view, a different perspective on things like disaster. I recently concluded a similar interview with a gentleman from Dominica, and we call it disaster economics or hurricane economics. So I was pretty pleased to see that this week you guys, you had that conversation, and I immediately shared my views with Dr. Simone and said, man, the stars are aligning. I think there has to be new thought and new insight, and hopefully when I get that time to speak, we could share some of these views. But happy to be on here, and thanks for the invite.
Yeah, and thank you for joining us last minute, Lennon. I truly appreciate that. So thank you, everyone, for being here. I'm sure you're going to have great contributions. But just by way of introduction again, in case you missed it in the beginning, we are here with Stronger Caribbean Together Network. So from Jamaica, we have Dorriane Duncan and Jhordan Chana from Island City Lab. From Barbuda, we have John Mussington from Barbuda Land Rights and Resource Committee. And then from Dominica, we have Mr. Athie, environmentalist, activist, panist. And then also from Dominica, we have Mr. Lennon Mathieu, who by profession is a geologist. So just by way of introduction, because this is the first time that Stronger Caribbean Together Network is joining us, I want to give us a brief introduction of this particular network, and then you can see why it will be important going forward for us to collaborate with them. So the Stronger Caribbean Network is a collaborative network of community-based organization, legal experts and academic partners across the greater Caribbean region. Our mission is to empower local communities in the fight against the interconnected threats of climate change, disaster capitalism, and food insecurity. We achieve this by fostering knowledge co-production, sharing effective grassroots responses, and providing legal advocacy and support. We envision a resilient and self-sufficient Caribbean region where local communities have the resources, knowledge, and solidarity to address the challenges posed by environmental changes, exploitative economic practices, and governance failures. Through our network, we strive to amplify the voices and experiences of marginalized communities, promote sustainable and equitable solutions, and create a digital space for transformation, collaboration, and learning. So that is our partnership in the network. And as we get started with the conversation, I think, and I see everyone is coming in on the Facebook and the YouTube Live. So guys, come on in, post your comments, and let us know where you're joining us from. I will be sure to take your comments as the program continues. But I'm sure we are all very anxious to find out what is going on in Jamaica, because as we know, on October 28th, and correct me if I'm wrong, a Category 5 hurricane decimated Jamaica. I believe it was the strongest hurricane to ever impact Jamaica, and it landed at 185 miles per hour. So indeed, a catastrophic hurricane that impacted Jamaica and the surrounding islands. And so at this point, we would like to have Dorriane and Jhordan just kind of tell us, what is the current state of affairs in Jamaica? Just give us some updates on what is, maybe back up and running, what work still needs to be done. Of course, we know this is a very long-term recovery. Mm-hmm. So kind of just tell us what's going on in Jamaica at this point in time.
Sure. So as of a couple of weeks ago, so this information is a bit outdated already. The initial assessments indicate that about 120,000 buildings in the western half of Jamaica have lost their roofs, impacting about 90,000 families, right? There, at the peak, there's about 27 communities that were marooned. Again, this is about 3 weeks ago, so obviously that number has gone down. But when I say marooned, that means these communities were cut off by landslides or flooding that has happened. And in some cases, it's still happening. The western side of Jamaica is a predominantly kind of limestone area. And so you have all of these sinkholes and areas where rainwater is seeping through and showing up in random places. So there are all of these really bizarre and I guess interesting geological things that are also happening, right? Rivers that were hidden for decades are now reappearing. And of course, in the midst of all of the environment doing all of this interesting stuff, there is pretty intense devastation, right? Again, the numbers are still coming through and estimates are still happening, but there is going to be a massive sort of homelessness crisis, right? So many people have lost their homes, and lots of people have also have their homes completely destroyed and decimated. And so those are the kind of raw figures that I have right now. Of course, as you can imagine, infrastructure elements like water and electricity were completely gone for several weeks. I know that water has been moving in slowly and returning to lots of communities, but there are lots of communities, especially in places like St. Elizabeth and Westmoreland, that are still relying on truck water. The utility provider is also going back in, and I think the last update I heard is that about 70% of the island has no restored electricity. I don't know where it is as of today. But I think those are the raw figures. Jhordan, any other things I'm missing?
Yeah, I think unfortunately has claimed the lives of 45 people. That is the most recent count, and I think it's hard to get a sense of what is happening on the ground. Slowly, aid is being flown in via helicopters. There's a mass movement of aid coming in from other Jamaicans from the sort of east part of the island into the west part of the island. There is sort of what I call the aid industrial complex, the international aid industrial complex, sort of underground as well. So all these sort of NGOs and institutions that, global institutions that specialize in disaster are also underground. People in Ukraine, like in, providing aid for the war in Ukraine are also in Jamaica, that kind of thing. And so it is a bit like chaotic right now, and it's, still, and it's hard to get a sense of what is progressing. The media is doing the best it can to like tell these stories, but the sort of underground realities are hard to assess. The state isn't doing maybe the best job at communicating progress and what is happening in the best way, right? But I think that human piece definitely needs to start coming through in the next couple of days. But I think that's where we are at the moment.
Yes, and thank you for that update. So this is where I think it is important for us to get started, because I think when we saw October come around, and let me know your thoughts on this. I want everybody to be able to chime in on this particular point. When I saw October roll around, I made a sign of the cross. I said, "Thank you, Lord, the hurricane season is over." Because typically the hurricane season ends at the end of September. But it is unprecedented to see a Category 5 hurricane strike one of the islands at the end of October. And not only that, we're seeing that these Category 5 hurricanes are occurring earlier in the season. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Beryl was a Category 5 and it struck in June. That as well is unprecedented. So let us just have a conversation. And John, I want to start with you. Let us just have a conversation about the frequency, the intensity, and the extended duration of time that we're seeing this hurricane seasons, and your thoughts on what is contributing to these outcomes.
Yes, definitely. What we're seeing today is quite unusual. At my age, I only started seeing hurricanes. I think the first hurricane I experienced was 1986. Then 1995 came where Hurricane Lewis struck Barbuda, Category 5. And since 1995, it was essentially 1, 2, 3 hurricanes per year. So things have ramped up exponentially. And what we're facing now are these mega storms coming through the region. And the time when these storms are forming, they just don't follow any pattern anymore. There was one time when we have this saying, June too soon, July standby, August is must, September remember, October all over.
All over.
No, it's not like that anymore. In my lifetime, I've seen hurricanes. Look where the present hurricane formed, in the Caribbean Sea. I've seen, for example, a Lenny formed in the Caribbean Sea, and rather going from east to west, started progressing from west to east. So everything is just turned upside down in terms of what's going on. And what you can say is that some persons in the world today, they dispute whether there's something called global warming going on, or climate crisis. They say it's a hoax. But then in our region, what have we seen? We're experiencing higher temperatures for longer periods of time. During in recent years, we have actually, when you monitor the sea surface temperatures, you're getting temperatures for the ocean that is just not within our recorded memory or history or data stream. So it's something that's quite unusual. And when you look at the Caribbean, where we're located, that chain of islands, which we know as a hurricane, as a Caribbean, sorry, Atlantic on one side, the Caribbean Sea on the other side, look at our history. Two plates joining together. So we're subject in this location to earthquakes, volcanoes, and now hurricanes, droughts, floods. So it seems like everything come together in this little region called the Caribbean. And whether you believe in climate change or not, what we can say is that we are living and experiencing these unusual disasters. When it's not droughts, it's floods, hurricanes, earthquakes, volcanoes. So that is our reality today.
Yes, yes. Thank you for that, John. And Athie, let me come to you, because we also need to talk about the contributing factors. Why is it that we are seeing these more intense hurricanes earlier and later in the season?
Well, the answer, to put at the risk of oversimplifying, is global climate has changed. And it has changed as a direct result, among other things, of the lifestyles and the work styles of human beings on Earth. We used to have a situation where there was value placed on having vegetative cover of land, even if you were not using it immediately for crop production or for building homes. But we are living at a time when profit maximization, earning as much money as quickly as possible, has led to a situation where forests are removed, the timber is sold, and the land is left to lie and take its chances. And the net effect of that is there's a lot more loss of soil, there's less protection of the land. And when that happens, the impact on the human population of these global climate changes becomes much more intense, as we're seeing in Black River in Jamaica and in other areas where there's a combined impact of a natural disaster with man-made disasters. When we use the term disaster in the Caribbean, as has already come out in our conversation so far, we think of natural disasters, earthquakes, volcanoes, hurricanes, etc., etc. But I would, at the risk of oversimplifying, I would say the equally damaging range and group of disasters that afflict us, particularly in island states, which are so much smaller, is man-made disasters. Our failure to pay attention to where we put things, where we put ports, where we put housing, where we put roads, and so on, where we put farms, where we put tree lines. So it seems to me that because we have so much less room to work with on an island situation, the margin for error and the margin for actually accentuating the damage of natural disasters is much narrower. And so the net effect is, with tourism in particular, we still are building hotels on beaches in the Caribbean, in a place where, when you look at what's going on in Jamaica, you are reminded that that's the last place you should be thinking of putting not just a hotel, but housing and home settlements. So we appear not to have been paying attention to what's been happening. And we have this look of surprise whenever there's a disaster, because we are not paying attention to the creeping disasters that are a daily occurrence in our islands And so we fail to gather data on what's happening with our soils. What is the rate of deforestation? What kind of architecture has stood up to category 4, category 5 in the past? And what kind will stand up to that now? So in other words, our approach to it has been really quite unprofessional, quite cavalier. We almost behave and treat with natural disasters in the same way we treat with carnival and mass. Wherever the drum is knocking, that's where we go. And we whine and we wail and we have a siwo, as we say in Dominica. But the net effect is we are doing damage. And we are ignoring the damage we are doing as humans. And so when the natural disasters come and add to that, we have a combined impact of natural and man-made disasters. And I believe we haven't paid enough attention to that in our preparation for dealing with disasters. And the net effect is that the impact is much greater than it really should be.
Mm-hmm. And so thank you, Athie. And so once we have Lennon chime in, what we're going to do this evening, again, we're looking at a blueprint for mitigating the impacts of these natural disasters. But the approach I want us to take is to look at the preparation phase during the disaster and post-disaster. What is being put in place to mitigate disasters based on preparation, what happens during the disaster, and what happens after the disaster. But Lennon, I wanted to give you an opportunity to chime in as well as we look at the cause. What is causing it? Maybe the role of the industrialized nation, the role of the role of big manufacturers and the pollution to the environment. You being a geologist, your thoughts on that? Can Lennon hear us? Lennon, are you frozen? Okay. I think he might be frozen. So when he comes back in, he can chime in. Lennon, can you hear me? All right, so guys, he's frozen for a minute, so he'll come back in. But let us go ahead and dive in because we want to look at preparation. So Dorriane and Jhordan, coming back to you guys as well. What do you believe Jamaica was prepared for this Category 5 hurricane? Of course, no island can be completely prepared for to be impacted by a Category 5 hurricane. But do you believe enough was done to prepare for this hurricane?
Not at all. I don't think we were prepared one bit. I think John's earlier point about the unpredictability and the fact that these weather patterns are doing something that no one understands is part of the reason that we're unprepared. I think Jamaicans, we find ourselves to be very lucky. I am 30 odd years old, never experienced a direct hit of a hurricane yet. And I think every time we're about to get a direct hit, we've been fortunate enough for that hurricane to turn. So I think because that has been the trajectory for so many different hurricanes, we expected the same thing to happen. And so I do think there is an extent to which people believe that the same thing was going to happen again, and it was going to turn at some point. And I think also people expected, let me not say people, I think the government did not do a sufficient job of underscoring the impact, where the impact is going to happen. And I think their apparatus to do evacuation completely failed, right? So we heard of cases where the government was suggesting for people to evacuate, but the sort of apparatus, bringing buses to tell people you need to leave now, I think that entire situation failed, right? And so I think there are multiple reasons why people don't evacuate. And I just want to have a more regional conversation that Jamaica wasn't the only one impacted by Hurricane Melissa. Right. Cuba literally got a direct hit the day after. Cuba got hit by a Category 4, so it's weaker than what it was in Jamaica, but it was still a direct hit. They were able to evacuate over 700,000 people, right? And so I think in Jamaica, people didn't leave for many reasons, right? Whether they've had negative experiences with the shelters before, they didn't believe the shelters were able to take care of them, which is proving to be true, that lots of these shelters became vulnerable. Lots of shelters lost their roofs. lots of shelters lacked the infrastructure, lacked food and supplies to take care of people, right? I think another reason why people didn't leave and didn't heed these warnings from the government is that they're concerned about their own land, their own property, and whether or not they had titles or did not have titles. A sense of uneasiness about leaving because they didn't trust the community, didn't trust the government, that when they come back, their land will be there for them. And so I think that was a major reason why so many lives were lost, because the evacuation process was just such a failure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I want to come to you, Jhordan, but I also want us to keep this conversation in perspective, because we have to look at the role of the government, and we have to look at the role of agencies such as the SEDIMA, which is supposed to be the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency, right? What role? Because, for example, Dorriane, you mentioned that Jamaica has never been hit by a Category 5 hurricane. So how do you prepare for that? But the other islands that have been hit by Category 5 hurricanes, why wasn't their expertise involved in helping Jamaica and everybody else who will be hit by a Category 5 hurricane? Why are we taking such a silo approach? Yes, we are Caribbean islands, we are islands by nature, but we are a region, we are a regional body. So I also want us to keep that in mind as we continue the conversation. But Jhordan, I want to come to you, and then Lennon, I'm going to come to you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think so. On a sort of systems level, I think it's important to understand that the disaster happens before the disaster, right? I don't think we can separate what occurred with Melissa from, and this is a regional thing as well, economic austerity that we've been living through for many years at this point, right? What has been happening, especially with our local disaster preparedness agency, ODPM, and across the board, is sort of a disinvestment in public services, right? A disinvestment in capacity for those agencies over time from the state, right? Things like garbage collection have slowly degraded over the years, which is crucial for like drain clearing to allow water to run off during hurricanes, right? All these things that are important to everyday life are also important to preparation for the hurricane. And over time, these systems have just been degraded and disinvested because of economic austerity, because of structural adjustment policies that have been happening across the Caribbean. And so the current state is really focused on reducing the debt and what they call macroeconomic stability, which is important, which is fine. However, at what point are we hyper-focused on debt repayment and not focused enough on preparation, on maintaining services that are crucial to this sort of disaster situation that we're in? And so we see it right now where ODPM has been gutted. ODPM is Office of Disaster Preparedness and Emergency Management in Jamaica, right? Hasn't been able to take the lead on this, which is leaving up to largely aid agencies, global aid agencies, and leaving it largely up to the military, right? And so we're in a situation where we don't have like experienced leadership, and it's strange because Jamaica has always had extremely competent people in disaster management. But again, over the years, we've lost these people to brain drain. We've lost capacity due to disinvestment and slowly money being removed from these agencies and put into what we call growth investments, right? Focusing on tourism, hyper-focusing on tourism, hyper-focusing on, construction and development. These things are important. These economies are important. I'm not saying no, but it leaves a lack of fiscal space for crucial everyday things, right? And so to talk about it regionally, as a bloc, we really have to start looking at this as a regional problem, right? I think the hurricane is really a natural process kind of generated by the rotation of the earth and a rebalancing of energy in many ways globally, right? Because the islands are so spread out, maybe we miss a hurricane here and there, right? Maybe a hurricane doesn't generate to that point, but generationally, at 2 or 3 times a generation, islands get direct hits, right? But we're so the region is still not integrated enough to realize that a hurricane in Dominica should be Jamaica's problem as well,
Right.
or a hurricane in Jamaica should be everybody's problem.
Mhm.
I see a lot of import. I see Barbados, I see Cayman coming to aid. I won't deny that. But I think there needs to be a systematic approach where this is everybody's problem. I think we're still too siloed and separated as a block. And we're seeing that happening, no, but the frequency, we got hit by Beryl last year. Beryl was a category 5. We got hit by Melissa this year. That's 2 category 5 hurricanes in a year apart. Things have changed, and the region needs to adapt to this as well. We contribute the least negligible amounts to the global warming, but are impacted most aggressively. We watched on our TVs when Melissa stopped in the Caribbean Sea and hovered and built energy from all the heat in the ocean and exploded from a tropical storm to a category 5 hurricane in the span of a few days. Things have changed.
Yeah, certainly.
We're victims of the change. Sorry,
Yeah, thank you for that, Jhordan. And certainly a disaster before a disaster. I think that resonates very well with all of us. Lennon, let me come to you for your thoughts, and then John, I want to come and hear what you're thinking of at this point. So, Lennon, over to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a personal experience in 1996. In my time at the Dominica State College, it was the CDC, Clifton Community College at the time. My final A-level exam, one of the questions was, how will the increase in temperature and the intensity of agriculture affect our environment and our weather? And we were supposed to answer that question and write basically an essay answer on that. So that's almost 30 years ago. That tells you how long we've been talking about global warming. And I remember very clearly when I saw that question, I was prepared to answer something on weather and climate. And that question was one of the questions that I was able to answer. And 30 years later, I can tell you most of what I wrote in that response is happening right now. We talk about things like desertification, which is increased desert in some areas, increased intensity of rainfall, increase in the intensity and frequency of hurricanes were some of the effects of having increased global temperatures. That tells you, as a 16-year-old, almost 30 years ago, we were having discussions on that. And at that time, I could answer some of the questions that they were asking, which we're seeing happen right now. My role and my education as a geologist have opened my eyes to a lot of things. And and some of you guys are making great points. I mean, they all jive. John mentioned the Caribbean the islands is on a convergent plate boundary with the Atlantic plate and the Caribbean plate forming the island arc. And right where Dominica is situated at the head of that arc, we have a lot of volcanic countries. A lot of people didn't know that there are 13 active volcanoes in the Caribbean. Dominica has 9 of them. It's probably one of the most dangerous or the most how I'd say that, sensitive spots for volcanic activity in the Caribbean. Historically, geologically, there has been eruptions. There have been evidence of eruptions. If you look at Montserrat, just take a look at recent, and I'm trying to be short, but I want to put it in perspective. If you look at Montserrat and you see some of the features in there, and you look at Dominica, you can see where volcanic activities have happened. Why am I saying this? The reason I'm saying this is because hurricanes have existed way before our time and will continue to exist. And I like what Jhordan said. Hurricanes are natural phenomena, and they are physics, chemistry, biology in one, because the earth is a living organism, and there are systems and processes that allow energy to spread towards the poles, and that happens through weather systems and ocean currents. So that's what hurricanes are. The problem is if you increase the temperature, then you increase the intensity of hurricanes through those dynamics that I have mentioned. But when I looked at what happened in Jamaica, if you look at the history of hurricanes in the Caribbean, you are right. A hurricane doesn't hit an island every year, but almost every year we have some part in the Caribbean being impacted by hurricanes. So, I mean, you look at our recorded history back before the 1800s, there have been documented hurricane activity in Jamaica. The point is, our human existence in the Caribbean is really, 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 really a point in time as compared to the existence or the earth processes and the earth. And I know that because of my field of study. I want to share two places with you, which will come in later. Japan. Japan is part of the Ring of Fire in the Pacific, and one of their biggest disasters they have is earthquakes. And over the years, I mean, you're talking about hundreds of years, they have lived in the presence of earthquakes and tsunamis. So the biggest factor in their settlement, their existence, is earthquakes. What have they done? They have developed one of the best engineering systems to be able to live within those hazards. And when they do happen, when you hear earthquakes in Japan, how many people do you hear get killed? And Japan has skyscrapers, they have all kinds of buildings. What they have done over the years is they have made sure that everything they have done in terms of their infrastructure, in their design, their planning, is done around the existential threat, which is earthquakes. We go to the Netherlands. You're talking about hundreds of years. What is the existential threats in Netherlands? Flooding. Mm-hmm. And if you go to Suriname, there are channels and sluices that were built in Suriname during the slave days by the Dutch. That tells you how long the Dutch have been able to develop their engineering to exist around flooding. The Dutch today are the best when it comes to flood control. I mean, even the US are asking this guy. Here's why that is important. For the last 100 years in our history in the Caribbean, hurricanes are our existential threat. And why are we not prepared? Because every year, I am frankly fed up of talking about hurricane season from June to November, and we're still talking about, oh, make sure you have enough batteries, make sure you have enough water, make sure you have this. This is the basic things. And what I am saying that if Mother Nature dictates our existence. We don't dictate Mother Nature's existence. And if we take that approach, we will realize that the existential threat or the natural process that we exist or we live within are hurricanes. So therefore, our existence, our architecture, our engineering, our education system, our habits and customs has to factor in hurricane resistance and resilience. So when you design in buildings, when you design in your hotels, you don't stop doing those things. But when you do those things, you have to factor in what is really controlling our safety and our existence in there. And it's hurricanes. It's hurricanes. Why would you build a house in Haiti, in Port-au-Prince, and not factor in that there is a fault line that passes through there that killed 250,000 people in 2010? And it still exists. Why would you not factor in that you living in a low-lying area that floods every 10 years, every 100 years, and you don't factor that into but you build houses there anyway. So you see where I'm getting at. Mm-hmm. So at the end of the day, we can't plan our society, and that's where it comes down to governance and administration. Because when we are developing societies, I think the number one thing that we have failed to look at is what are the disasters, what are the risks, what are some of the things. When you build houses, you don't build on a riverbed. You build somewhere that you know that's not going to flood. You have to factor that in. And I think what has happened through the years is we have not learned and we have not paid enough attention or given enough respect to the fact that we are in an area that is affected by hurricanes way before we existed there. And it's going to happen way before we've gone, even if the intensity may have increased, but there have always been hurricanes in the Caribbean. And I think that has not played an important role in our physical planning, in our social planning, in our settlement planning, in our health planning. That should be dictating how we exist.
Yeah, and those are brilliant points, Lennon. So thank you for that. I want to come to John, but Athie, when I come to you, I want to piggyback on what Lennon is saying, because we heard the utterances of our Prime Minister, who said that Dominica, after Hurricane Maria in 2017, was going to be the very first climate resilient country in the world. So I want us to talk about that. So Athie, when I come to you, I would like to for you to chime in on that. But John, over to you. Is enough being done to prepare for these hurricanes and natural disasters in the Caribbean? And what should be the role of government and agencies such as the CDMA in preparing us for these disasters?
The short answer to that, Simone, is no, unfortunately. And let me elaborate on that answer. Lennon gave some good background in terms of the context in which we're working. So for me, preparedness, right? When it comes to Barbuda, for example, in our building and so on, we started getting hurricanes 1989, then 1995. So our building housing stock is fairly strong, okay? Because we've done things differently, all right? So the government policy now is the part of preparedness that is extremely lacking. And this is why. We know that we are living in a region which is disaster prone on all areas, all right? Now, what we do in terms of our policies should reflect that. Wetlands, the beaches, living coral reef, they are the attraction in terms of the industries that sustain a greater proportion of our islands. They say the greatest contributor to GDP is tourism. Yet at the same time, when it comes to preparedness, we are not making our policies reflect that. So here's what we do. We build these hotel plants. Where do we put them? On the coastline. How do we build them? We destroy the wetlands in order to build them, which in turn cause us to lose our beaches, which is a frontline defense to storm waves and winds coming in. We cut down the wetlands in order to build them. And by cutting down the wetlands, we lose our filtration that keeps our coral reef and marine areas alive. And which in fact, in the long run, when you understand how these systems work together, they are the basis for having clear water, sandy beaches, living coral, beautiful islands. So our policies are geared towards destroying those very things which are our frontline defense. So when it comes to preparedness, policy-wise, our governments are failing miserably. You do not put your major economic activity, tourism, in those critical areas which are going to be most impacted by these storms, and which in itself, the wastewater and the activities of this tourism actually kills what it is that attracts people to these islands. And at the same time, you're making us vulnerable. So from the point of view of the ordinary citizen building a house, I think they're pretty much prepared. But when it comes to policies, our governments are failing us miserably. And it's not just a simple thing, because part of the climate agreement, where we are going out there saying we are victims, which is true, for something that we did not create, we also have an obligation under the Paris Agreement not to put our critical infrastructure in harm's way, and not to do things which actually destroy those very things which are our protection. So preparedness, yes, the citizens and so on, in terms of how they build, they can be prepared. But the more important thing when it comes to government policy, we are failing miserably because we fail to live up to our international obligations under the various treaties. We fail with respect to our implementing our physical planning laws, which are designed to protect us by not mowing down wetlands, destroying beaches, destroying rivers, and that sort of thing. So policies in terms of what we do are putting us in harm's way.
Yes, very well said, John. Thank you for that. And Athie, as I come to you, I kind of want you to piggyback on what John is saying, because he's making a very valid point that the policies are not being implemented. And just listening to the brilliance of everything that's been said tonight, it just gives me the sense that who is the government listening to in terms of preparation? Because it seems like just about everyone on this panel should be a part of a government emergency planning organization on their islands to try to implement some of these policies. So Athie, I want you to chime in, and I also want you to tell us, because we talked about the Prime Minister talking about Dominica being the first climate resilient country in the world, and this is what, 8 years later, and where are we with that initiative?
We've been talking about threats and existential threats, and I think that's a good place, for us to move into the next phase of our conversation. What are those threats? I truly believe that the greatest existential threat to civilized living in the Caribbean is Caribbean people. We believe that we have a system of governance called democracy, but it is government of, for, and by the government, of, for, and by the political parties that form government, not of, for, and by the people. And so the decision-making processes in our country perfectly and almost completely exclude any possibility of involvement of the people in whose name we claim to have established our particular form of government. So policy making gets done by a group of guys and ladies nowadays, included, who basically are thinking of, for, and by themselves and their interests. You look at the Caribbean today, which sector has generated the greatest number of millionaires throughout the Caribbean? Think about it. Where have our millionaires come from over the last 40 years, 50 years? These are people who've been in government. These are not people in the private sector. There was Butch Stewart in Jamaica. There was Mr. Boyer in St. Vincent. There was Massey in Trinidad. But by and large, the new wave of wealth, which means the new wave of poverty that was generated and created as a result of the accumulation of wealth at the top, has come from people who we entrusted with the right to look after things for the rest of the people. Now that's the thing that most of us in the Caribbean don't like to speak about, don't like to say, but it is absolutely true. In the case of government in Dominica and the promises that have been made over the last how many years, we've had a government that's been in office now for 25 years, which also is interestingly becoming the norm in this part of the Caribbean. In St. Vincent, we have an election tomorrow where the Prime Minister, Raul Gonzalez, is looking for his 6th consecutive term in office.
Crazy.
And so on. So the question of finding a system of governance that allows, encourages, and facilitates the infusion of new ideas, of persons who have availed themselves of new levels of training and technology so that new kinds of decisions can be made. That is not part of the governance system. We have something we call in Dominica the integrated development planning process. Dominica is the only island in the Caribbean that so far has had an integrated development plan prepared for it. but it is the only island which has a plan that was prepared for it, but has done nothing about it and has refused to use it, because in that integrated development plan, the business of disasters and disaster prevention for the first time became a component of the architecture of development planning, and is incorporated in all areas. In education, a component for dealing with disasters; in health, in transportation, in ports and travel, in tourism, in agriculture. And there was such severe resistance to that approach to planning by the very administration that commissioned the plan itself, because it meant a dispersion of decision-making influence and power. It meant a dispersion of budgets. It meant less control over budgetary allocations that were traditional and so forth. And the net effect was government of, for, and by the government, or the governing group, prevailed. And so we still do not have an agriculture that in any way reflects the fact that we have hurricanes every year. And let me remind us, we keep talking about category 5, category 5. It doesn't take but a category 2 to cause major damage if you have not prepared, as the brother and the sister have been saying, if you haven't located your infrastructure in the right place, if you haven't used, as Lennon reminds, the right technology in building your roads, for example. If you have regions like in Dominica, where the average annual rainfall is between 250 and 300 inches of rain a year, how can you build a road there with the same technology that you're building a road in an area where the average annual rainfall is 50 inches or less? I mean, come on. So let's be clear. You know, that these are just the mouthings of people who have found a formula for retaining political influence in their particular islands. And the net effect of that is every island leadership group wants to keep their little kingdom. So they're not going to share. They're not going to come together and respond. The net effect is that what we had been building for decades, something called CARICOM, which nowadays very few people seem to know about, is all for all intents and purposes gone. So all the efforts at building together, whether it be within this cricket, whether it be importing drugs together, pharmaceuticals together, whether it be sea transportation. How can you have an archipelago of island states separated in some cases by less than 25 miles of seawater, and you do not have a regular way of moving people and goods across those island to island? Come on. So that although we could help each other when it came like a disaster like this, we don't have the capacity, we don't have the means to move items, a truck, a loader, or cement or water from Dominica to Jamaica. It does not exist. It's easier for Jamaica to get. So the infrastructure just reflects our determination to remain on our own. And that is at the heart of the existential threat that we pose to ourselves. Our grandparents used to tell us, you know, be careful. You know, you could be your own worst enemy. We are. And the people of the Caribbean, there's a group of people in government, I don't worry too much about them. They come and they used to go every 5 years, now they're going every 20 years. But we are here permanently as the people. The effect of a lack of organization among the people, to me, is the greater threat to sustainability, sustainable living and resilience than the inefficiency of government.
Yes, thank you, Athie. So many wonderful points. But we must go to the studio to take some calls. But when we come back, I want us to come to Dorriane and Jhordan, because what we're going to look at next is emergency response. So the disaster has struck, and now there's complete decimation of everything: infrastructure, people's livelihoods, people's basic needs. what have you seen in Jamaica? What went right, if any? And what is lacking? And then I want us to go around the room and talk about disaster relief, short term, what we should be doing, intermediate, what we should be doing, long term, what we should be doing to recover from this disaster. So kind of just keep in mind the direction we're going into next as we go over to the studio in Dominica, so Lambi can give out the phone numbers. And then guys, keep the thoughts coming in on Facebook and YouTube. I will come over and take them in just a minute. So Lambi, over to you.
Roots Connection and Q. The numbers are as follow: 449-3095, 449-3096, 449-3097, 616-4257. Those are local numbers. The overseas number or the international number, 305-432-9624. Let me run those again. 449-3095, 3096, 3097, 616-4257. Those are local access numbers. The international overseas number, 305-432-9624. Back to you, Simone.
Yes, thank you. And for anyone who joined us late, don't forget we are talking about disaster capitalism, political victimization, and other challenges as the Caribbean navigates more intense natural disasters. And we're very happy to be joined by members of Stronger Caribbean Together Network. We are partnering with them. So we have a regional panel as we're looking to create a blueprint for mitigating the impact of natural disasters. So on the Facebook Live, we have a number of people. I think that should be Patricia. Patricia, good evening to you. She says, good evening. Big up John, Jhordan, Dorriane, and Athie. Love from Jamaica, Kingston, Jamaica. Margot is also here with us. She says, good evening. And then Patricia says, Stronger Caribbean Together to the world. Damien Dublin is also here listening. He says this is a timely discussion. We also have Greg Baptiste, and he says the Americans didn't go to COP30 climate summit in Brazil. Donald Trump said climate change is the biggest con hoax. Alvin Thomas, always great to have you on board, Alvin. And he says that's just talk. Simone, the organization CREED that was established after Hurricane Maria has been disbanded and no longer in operation. And then Greg adds they're putting concrete in Roseau to cause more flooding. These people are incompetent. Then we have Patricia, brilliant points by Athie, hit nail on head. Government for the government. The people are the side issue. People have to come to their senses, their future being sidelined. And then Marina Charles is saying, good evening. So guys, thank you for being here and thank you for being a part of the conversation. So guys, as we move from the preparation phase to what do we do after these catastrophic hurricanes and any disaster, as a matter of fact, has impacted the island. Jhordan, let me come to you because we're talking emergency relief. In your viewpoint, your vantage point in Jamaica, what, if anything, you believe went well right after the hurricane struck and what was lacking? And then same question to you, Dorriane, we're going to come to you. And then John, I want you to talk with us after they've contributed on rebuilding better and the land issues that have plagued many of our Caribbean islands for decades. So I want you to talk on that. But first, let us go to Jhordan and Dorriane on the relief, the emergency relief efforts in Jamaica.
Yeah, I think the main thing that went right and in many ways surprised me was, I think, the social capital of Jamaica. In many ways, the links and the social networks. So a lot of the damage was in the West. The East was fine, but those familial relationships really created what we call networks of care across the island, right? Those social infrastructures are crucial and have been like important in sustaining a lot of people. There has been um, a very generous, energized effort to help with relief. And so this peer-to-peer, people-to-people relationship has been heartening and really exciting to see. Um, in a context where I thought there's a lot of social isolation, I'm seeing in the sort of um, eve of a disaster or in the aftermath of a disaster, um, those social ties restitch and become like crucial in sort of survival and sustaining. So I think that went right. I think what went wrong broadly has been the state's response to the disaster. On one hand, I think they have been saying nobody can prepare for a category 5, right? That has been their sort of excuse in many ways, to deflect from the realities of the slowness of their response and the inadequacy of their response. I've already said before that the disaster happens before the hurricane, right? Through economic austerities, defunding of critical services. One of those services is actually education. Why is that important? Because many of the shelters were schools, right? Many of the shelters we use are schools. The state has not been investing in the infrastructure of these schools over many, many years. And so many people who go to the shelters are entering dilapidated situations in many ways. And when the hurricane hits, those services either collapse or they're inadequate to host people long term, right? And in that way, something that we've been forced to live with for many years, the poor infrastructure of our schools, becomes a critical point of contention for the hurricanes, right? The lack of disability access in the shelters, aka the lack of disability access for the schools, which feels like just a problem for people with disabilities until the hurricane comes and people become disabled in the hurricane, or the elderly is directly affected by the lack of access. And so that's one part of a broader thing. To re-emphasize this issue of economic austerity, the state is very much like looking at the disaster, the sort of cost of the disaster, which is estimated to be about $8 billion. Yeah, it is immense, and it feels like there's still a hesitation to spend, to spend on aid. In many ways, we think they're waiting for aid to run out before the state really intervenes. And that is what it feels like on the ground, right? And so what that means is that people are kind of in limbo, waiting for relief from the government. I don't want to disparage the government entirely. They have been delivering aid. They have been putting together care packages. But, and Dorriane, you can remind me, they had given local governments maybe, I forget the paltry fee, 150,000 Jamaican dollars.
Which is about less than 2,000 US dollars.
It's about $1,000 US dollars per counselor to deliver aid. Councillors or local government is the direct representation that the people have with the state in many ways. And that is what they were given as aid to distribute. Councillors are talking about they can only give 8 people an aid package for one day with that amount. And so there's been this hesitation, this like focus on the abstractions like the macroeconomy or debt to GDP ratio, and those things don't really matter now because people are suffering, and it is a serious issue, a serious failure, I think, of a government that is in many ways tied to the extractive global economy, right? That are trying to participate in something that is stacked against them in many ways. That has caused this disaster. They're still trying to play by the rules of those games in many ways. And so I think that is the fundamental or structural failure that we're seeing. But again, the sort of social infrastructure, the relationships between people was very exciting and heartening to see and seeing how that worked to help. And it seems like that aid is what is sustaining a lot of what's happening. There's also the international aid agencies, but I do have suspicions about
Yeah.
their sort of role in all this, and
Mhm.
there is in many ways an incentive for the disaster to stay as long as it can, and for them to like generate funding and monies. So I don't want to disparage them either, but I do think that there is perverse incentives for them. But the people to people relationships, that is strong and that is going, and I hope it continues. We know that there's a media cycle, and once this leaves, people forget that there are people still struggling for shelter, for aid, and we hope that this continues and that the media plays their role in continuing to tell these stories so that it is present and, you know, allow for that aid from the east to reach into the west of the island.
Right, right. Very well said. As we're having this conversation, I'm just wondering, how do we ensure that nobody gets left behind? Right? Because, and I'm very happy to see how the Jamaican celebrities, the athletes, the musicians, the singers, how they just completely reached back out to Jamaica to provide relief. But what about the needs assessment? So Dorriane, if you can chime in on that, how are we assessing the needs of who needs what, so that we're ensuring that nobody gets left behind? And then, guys, I'm just gonna open up the floor so anyone can chime in for the rest of the discussion, because I know that you have thoughts that I may not be asking the question for. So once Dorriane responds, we're also going to talk about political victimization, because we know that many times the resources that are donated to the governments are directed to their political supporters. It is a reality. It's a reality in Dominica. I can speak for Dominica. I cannot speak for the other islands, but I know that Lennon, Athie, and I, who are from Dominica, can tell you that we saw situations where relief rations were being distributed and people's homes were being bypassed because they were not political supporters of the government, and that should not be the case. But before we do, let me come to you, Dorriane, and talk about how are we doing needs assessment, the role of social media, and then we're just going to open up the floor so we can make any contributions that are on our minds at this point.
Yeah. I mean, I think to the comments that were mentioned earlier, I don't think there should be any region that is better at emergency management than the Caribbean, right? I think all of the experts of the world should come from a region that has volcanoes, has hurricanes, earthquakes, all of these things combined, right? And unfortunately, that is not the case. And I think what is in terms of what's going bad, and I just want to be clear, we are still within that sort of disaster continuum recovery, right? So it's still actively going on. I think what is disappointing is the fact that we are not doing a sort of collective learning from all of the hurricanes that have passed. It constantly seems like this is the first hurricane we've ever experienced, and that the decisions and the experiences of a Bahamas in Dorriane, the experiences of a Maria in half of the Caribbean, those lessons are not coming to us, right? So the government announced I think last week or the week before, that their sort of transitionary shelter solution is going to be the importation of 5,000 prefabricated container buildings, right? And I'm not going to necessarily talk or have a debate about the validity of that as a solution, but at the very least, we should have had conversations in Bahamas, in Haiti, and understand what was the experience of those things. We should know exactly what the complaints from the people who receive these homes are from these other islands, because they've been used, right? So we have this term in Jamaica, puss in a bag, right? That you have purchased something and you have not validated whether or not it can work for you. And we don't have to go through this sort of test case scenario, because literally all of these experiences, the breadth of different solutions, the failures, the successes that exist in the Caribbean context. And so I'll be honest, I have not interfaced with any of the agents with SEDEMA or any sort of regional body, local regional or Caribbean regional body. So I don't know the extent to which they're involved in giving feedback and guidance on what these shelter solutions should be, but it seems sort of absent. And I think that is a massive sort of disservice, right? That we are ignoring what we have already learned, right? So that's one thing. I think the other thing that is happening, as Jhordan kind of eloquently put it, him talking about the lack of support and funding and investment in our emergency body, our local emergency body, which is Office of Disaster Emergency Management and Preparedness, right? I think when you have that government body that is responsible for emergency response, when they are not fully, when they don't have the complete capacity, and you have this international aid sort of aid industrial complex coming in, and I'm not talking about the sort of, their intentions. I'm sure most of them are well intended, but if you have this immense amount of international folks and corporations coming in, and our local government does not have the capacity to say, these are our intentions, these are our priorities, this is how we imagine recovery, this is what we define as a sort of priority. If that's not happening, what you're leaving are these international organizations to make those decisions by themselves. And I think a couple of the spaces that we're kind of seeing that happen, right? So organizations like Food for the Poor, different UN-related organizations, all of these humanitarian organizations, of course, they come with a wealth of experience, but they are not responsive to people, right? I don't pay taxes to them. You know what I mean? So I cannot come back and complain to them. The government is I can hold the government accountable, right? And it feels as though lots of those sort of conversations around who the priorities, where we're going, what are the decisions in terms of aid, we are not putting ourselves in a position to be able to state what the national priorities are. And so those priorities are just being met. And as for my understanding of how they are categorizing need, so, as was the case in Bahamas for Hurricane Dorriane, the UN, the International Organization of Migration, that's a UN agency, they have intense sort of geospatial mapping that's going on. So they have mapped the level of destruction in most of the parishes. And so that information is publicly accessible. And so what it seems like is lots of these individual organizations will pick a parish, and they are kind of making their own decisions and their own rationale based on their funding source and the amount of funding on what they're going to be doing. And again, I think the sort of lack of coordination speaks to the lack of strength of our local organization, our local government and ODPEM, to be able to direct them and say, this is what you need to do. And I think that's a very unfortunate place and position to be in. And again, given the fact that we are in the most disaster-prone area, that should not be the case. We should be able to pull expertise from the region to direct it. And, that's in my perspective from where I am, it doesn't seem like that's what's happening.
Okay, thank you for sharing it. Yes, John, building back better. Land issues, land rights issues. Your thoughts on that? I think you're muted, so let's make sure you unmute yourself. Building back better. And then Lennon and Athie, I'm coming to you.
Yes, I'm just here listening to Dorriane and some of the points she's making there, and the whole question of a needs assessment and so on. You know what the reality is? When we go through these disasters, we often face another disaster which is even greater than the initial shock. And that comes about simply when you exclude the persons who have suffered the disaster from the decision making. Now, if you're going to make a needs assessment, who knows the needs of the affected more than the affected themselves? And so when you get these agencies come in and they basically begin to make decisions and needs assessment and so on, and then you exclude the people who are affected, who knows the ground more than anyone else, that is the start of the other disaster. And so building back better, I think one of the first things we need to do in terms of the building back better is to understand that when it comes to disaster management, it needs to be in the hands of communities. Mm-hmm. Communities in the first place, they have to be prepared in terms of understanding that the disasters will come. And the best way to help communities is to provide them with the resources that they need to manage their own recovery, to manage their own rebuilding, because they and they alone know what the situation was before and what the situation needs to be in preparation for future events. And they are the only ones who can direct that building back better. So my biggest fear, and having gone through what happened in 2017 in Barbuda, having looked at what happened to Bahamas in terms of their disaster, New Providencia, what happened to them, Grenada and St. Vincent and so on, what's happened to them in their disaster, Jamaica, what will be happening to them going forward. One of the key things that I'm realizing is that if you exclude the people who know better, you're in for a greater disaster. And so your building back cannot be better unless it's informed by the persons who are affected directly. You live in your house. You know how it failed. You live in your community. You know where the weak points are. If you do not have a voice in that planning for the building back better, there's no way you can achieve the goal of building back better. And building back better has to include the component of that shared experience and understanding, because when the next disaster is going to come to hit the community, it's only those who have lived through the previous one who are going to be best able to prepare and to make sure that things are better going forward. So that's the perspective, because we've seen it, and that's one of the reasons Stronger Caribbean Together came in, because when you looked at what communities went through throughout the region, and you're seeing similarities, you're seeing the same mistakes, okay? And when it comes to land, all economies is based on resources, which is hinged on land. So you can't get away from that. And then you have to make sure that going forward, that land and those resources that they sustain, they remain in the hands of those persons who belong to the communities. Mm-hmm. When you look at what happened in Hawaii, when you look at what happened in Puerto Rico and some of the other islands, what you're seeing is that those persons who control monetary resources have an open window to come in now and buy up, control, take a hold of land, which is resources and things. And if you allow that to happen, you're going to be in for the bigger disaster. So that is something that as a region we must pay attention to. Our lands, the resources that those lands represent, and the fact that we must remain in control of them. We have to guard against the gentrification. We have to guard against the speculation in the real estate activities. We have to guard against persons who will use that shock when communities are at a state where they can't think straight to take advantage of the situation. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you actually very clearly defined what is disaster capitalism, John. So thank you for that. And I took the liberty of looking it up so that we are more aware, we are more cognizant of this idea of disaster capitalism, so we can act to prevent it. So disaster capitalism describes the process by which corporate interests take advantage of a crisis to increase their power and profits at the expense of people corporate entities achieve greater power and control by exploiting the fear and urgency of the moment in order to secure profitable government contracts without clear oversight to scare property owners into selling their property for cheap and to buy up foreclosed bank-owned properties for cheap. In short, they make money from misery and misfortunes of others. Each of these actions increases corporate power and ownership of housing and land in our communities. Disaster capitalism is most often referenced after a natural disaster such as earthquake, hurricane, or fire. However, disaster capitalists can exploit any kind of crisis, including unemployment and economic crisis we are experiencing today. So you nailed the definition of what we're talking about. So thank you, John, for that. So Lennon, let me come over to you. I'm sure you have a lot of thoughts that you want to share at this point. And then Athie, we are coming over to you because we have to expound on that political victimization, because that is yet another disaster that we're seeing in the Caribbean. And then before we wind down, the time is never our side on this program. I want to come back to Jhordan and Dorriane so they can tell us how we can assist Island City Lab and anything else that they're working on. And I must mention that Margot mentioned the region was divided during colonization, and it takes groups like Stronger Caribbean together to connect the divide. So that is why we're bringing this partnership to the forefront, because we have to take a regional approach. A lot of the vulnerabilities that Dominica faces, Barbuda faces the same ones, Jamaica faces the same ones, Grenada, but yet we're all operating as silos. But what we're seeing, talking about election season, is that the politicians are creating coalitions to secure their political prowess on these islands. But when it comes to the matters, the concerns that matter to our communities, we see that we are lacking. So that is the role that networks like Stronger Caribbean together will continue to play. So Lennon, let me come to you, then Athie, and then over to Island City Lab for how we can assist in their efforts. Lennon.
Yeah, thanks. There are so many things running into my head. I'm gonna try to make it short and compartmentalize because this conversation could go on for a whole week. But I'm Jhordan and John and Athie said a couple of things, and I'm gonna put them in perspective. I think as a region, we need to change our mindset in being victims. And it's tying into what I said earlier as it relates to Japan and the Netherlands. Because you expose yourself to exploitation if you're vulnerable, if you don't see yourself as valuable, if you see yourself as incapable. And I think from our history of slavery, I think a lot of people tend to forget that slavery was an economic situation. And after we were free, we were not given ownership of the revenues of the plantation, and we suffered as a result. So today, we still have that mindset that somebody has to come to do something for us. And if we always expect somebody to come and do something for us, we're going to be exploited at some point. I think it's the right time for, while the politicians are making coalitions, and as Athie said, it's politicians ruling for themselves. We, the people of the Caribbean, have to start being active in our own development and start making that regional coalition, just like the West Indies cricket did. It was not politicians. It was players playing in Shell Shield and all these lakes that created one of the strongest cricket team in the world. Jhordan mentioned something a while ago. He said the damage in Jamaica was about $9 billion US. I hate to have to say it, but wars, disasters, adverse conditions create a need for goods and services. And what happens is, with all the relief you see coming into Jamaica from celebrities, from donor countries, from all that stuff, they're bringing in supplies, they're bringing in medicine, they're bringing in food. Somebody has to produce that food, and it has to cost somebody to produce that food, right? So who else is going to bring it but the people who have a good economic system, a good social system, a country where majority of the people are employed with high-paying jobs, people who can afford insurance and have disposable income to do other things. So Jhordan keeps saying the disaster already happened. The hurricane didn't make us, the hurricane, and like I said earlier, hurricanes are natural phenomena. They only become disasters when they impact humans, when they impact where humans are living. That's why they become disasters. So he's absolutely right. The disaster is not the hurricane. The disaster is a government in office for 25, 26 years who had not had a vision to put systems in place to make sure that our people could afford their and I'm bringing it down simple, pay their bills, send their kids to school, have extra money to pay on insurance, have extra money to make sure that they can, instead of cutting corners and building their house, they'll stick to the building codes, because these are some of the real life pressures that cause people to cut corners. The disaster had already happened when we failed to realize that we are living in a hurricane-prone region, and we had not make the disaster priority in how we construct these houses. So when things like that happen, you have a society that's been spending its past 10 years paying IMF, paying the World Bank, paying Venezuela, sitting down waiting for a developing country or an industrial country to pay your bills. And then the disaster passes on the people in the country, because all what we're saying, with a region that has millions of people, we have not seen the unemployment reports. We have not seen the policies that have been geared at helping these people build wealth so that they can be independent. So what you have happening is these industrial nations who have been doing that for the people, who have the extra income, who have the businesses that are making profits, who have people who are working. One of the reasons that we in the Caribbean leave and go to the United States and Canada and England, it's because of the economic opportunities. So here lies the disaster. This disaster is the leadership we have had in the region for a long time, who have not utilized the people of the region, the most important resources, the 40 million people in the Caribbean region, to see the value in these people in being able to solve their own problems, be consumers for goods and services within the region, to build the wealth, to build the economy of the region. And therefore, when the disasters happen and you have a guy living by the bayside in a house trying to sit on his roof while the hurricane comes, it tells us what the problem is. And I'm bringing it to the real life situation. I just saw a report last week after I had that presentation last week that Home Depot didn't meet their quarterly forecast for the quarter three of this year, because there were less storm impact in the US and elsewhere than expected. And when I see that, we can sit in the Caribbean and say, damn, these people are cruel and evil. But the reality is, every war that is fought around the world is an adverse human created condition. Somebody have to create the bullets. Somebody have to create the bombs. You guys just go and take a look and see how much it costs for an aircraft carrier. While we're sitting here, the US government has military assets in the Caribbean. Do you know how much it costs for one aircraft carrier to be in the islands for a day? I think it's between $3 to $15 million a day for one aircraft carrier in the Caribbean. So you mean to tell me they do not have enough money to build back Jamaica and the rest of the Caribbean? The point I'm making is, as a region, we have to change our mindset in how we respond to natural disasters and events, because really and truly, for us to be resilient everything else that we go to the polls to vote for, everything else that the government structure puts in place has to lead up to those situations. And will it stop hurricane from impacting us? No. But what it will do, it will better prepare us for as a region to say, hey, you know what? Jamaica to get destroyed. Jamaica has a $6 billion in damage. How much of the goods and services we can get from the rest of the region to help build back Jamaica? Because Jamaica economy has been doing so well. The people of Jamaica have employment has been 70% in Jamaica. Jamaica GDP has developed over the past 3 years. Jamaica gross national product has been up to par with developing countries. Now Jamaica can source its resources from Dominica, its water, from Grenada, from St. Lucia that have not been destroyed, and vice versa when the other islands are impacted. How can we source our material and supply? So where can we bridge that gap as former slaves, former people from Africa, we share the same history, culture, blood, the heritage, how can we share that knowledge, that experience, so that we as a people can see the value in ourselves in directing our own path? Unless we get to that point, every time there's an adverse condition, we're going to sit in a corner. And I'll tell you what, I see our leaders after hurricane, tears in their eyes, go to the UN and they go begging. And what they do is they use the state of the Caribbean to beg the UN and everybody else for funds so that they can continue to manipulate the people. And then we complain about the same industrial nations causing the pollution. You see where the cycle gets worse. So at the end of the day, we have to ask ourselves a question. Are we going to continue to sit there expecting people to solve our problems? Or are we going to use our education, my experience? I heard the young lady, Dorriane, talked about water coming up in strange places in Jamaica. And like I said, as a geologist, I thought that was pretty interesting because I knew why it happened. And the reason why I knew it happened is because as a high school kid, I learned the formation of the West Indies. And what did the formation of the West Indies told me? The formation of the West Indies told me about the mountain building periods when Jamaica was a coral island underneath water, got uplifted. And there are a bunch of caves and caverns underneath there. So what is that? What is the purpose of all this education if I cannot understand how that relates to the processes, the systems that are going to occur in my region and put me in a position to solve the problem? Do you see what I'm saying? So the solution for hurricane preparedness should have already been there. The solution for volcanoes in Dominica should have already been there. The solutions for earthquakes should have already been there. At this point, we should be implementing these things that we have planned 20, 30 years ago. And that's why I said the disaster has already happened, because when you have a government in office for 25 years and we cannot even boast of what they have done to advance the people of the region, then that's the problem. So I think when you talk about disaster capitalism, war, disasters, adverse conditions create consumption. They create need for goods and services, and somebody has to provide that good and service. And if we are incapable of providing that goods and service for ourselves, the dry goods, the canned goods, the chips, if we're not doing it, somebody has to fill that void. And that's where the exploitation comes in. So we have to ask of ourselves our question: how are we building capacity within our region that when things happen, we can deal with it?
Yeah, and you know, the concern as we're having this conversation is, so now the hurricane season is quote unquote over. So what is being done in the interim until next June? Are we going to sit by and wait until the hurricane season reopens and then we're starting this conversation? The Caribbean has been experiencing hurricanes for centuries.
Simone,
I think we do not have a way forward.
Simone, I think they should take away the idea of a hurricane season in the Caribbean.
Right. It's always
that would solve the problem. Just take away the idea there's a hurricane season. Because I think what it does, it thinks it's like carnival season. You go jump in carnival and you go. There's nothing called a hurricane season in the Caribbean. When the recovery from Jamaica is going to take, look at, we've been affected by hurricane in Dominica since 2017. the effects are still there.
Yep.
Within 2017 and now, look at how many hurricanes have affected the Caribbean. So there's nothing called a hurricane season. So I think the notion of saying there's a hurricane season is giving people a false impression that you have to prepare for hurricane every 6 months.
Right.
And I think that's the big problem.
Right, and I think that is the overarching conversation that we're having this evening, that we have to look at regional integration. And that is why I'm happy that on this panel we have representatives from Barbuda, Jamaica, Dominica, and we know that in the Stronger Caribbean Together network, we have members from across the Caribbean, because it has to begin with organizations like Stronger Caribbean Together to pull in the expertise, because we see that certainly our governments are not doing the work. So that is the role that we have to play in these organizations. And again, I always want to shout out Margot, because she was the one who introduced me and brought me on board. But Athie, let me come to you. Our time is speeding by. So in about 2 minutes, Athie, give us your final thoughts as we get ready to wind down, because I really want to chime in and have Island City Lab tell us how we can assist with what they're doing. So Athie, over to you. And then John, I'm not forgetting you. We'll come to you as well.
Well, let me just say, the notion of disaster capitalism, is alive. We saw it in operation here, where an ambassador of Dominica to the United Nations was brought down after Hurricane Maria to be in charge of the distribution of relief supplies to the networks that would take it out into the countryside. He was placed in charge. One of the results of that was that containers of food that did not get distributed to the people in greatest need because they were not of the right color politically, spoiled and had to be dumped. Another, and that's an impact of capitalism. Somebody in charge is deciding who's going to get and who's going to be without. Another thing that happened, these little pieces of evidence to make it come alive. We received chainsaws, generators by the hundreds, all in great need throughout the island. But I could have taken you down to a place up the West Coast, which used to be used as a garage for the public works. And you would go there and you'd find agents of the political party in power sitting down there selling generators at bargain basement prices.
Wow,
so let's be clear. It's not just the corporations of the world, but it's the grassroots corporations of the world are also doing the same thing. The politicians and the agents. So that disaster capitalism is alive and well. And what disasters have done by doing what Lennon just reminded us, excluding the influence and impact of local expertise and bringing in foreign expertise, it makes it even worse. Because you have no chance to stop the bleeding away of the relief supplies that are so grievously needed. But in addition, and this would be my closing thing, disasters, you have to prepare for disasters before they come. Otherwise, when the disaster comes, it's already too late. You have to do one other thing is data, information.
Yes.
In Dominica, we haven't had a census for the last 2 census cycles. We don't even know how many people we have in the country. We don't know where they're living. We don't know what their age is, where the elderly are. So how in heaven's name are you going to be able to design a relief distribution system when you don't even know where your people are in a tiny island like that? So let's be clear. Data. We don't know where our crops are. We haven't done an updated survey of what have we planted? What is in the ground? Where's the dasheen, the yam, the sweet potato, the tanya, the couscous? So, because in fact, often we have food after a hurricane, but we are waiting for somebody to send us imported processed food because we are ignoring the fact that under the ground is food. And it's staying there spoiling while we're waiting to eat some bad food. And in the meantime, we have already started to do things this year that are making us more vulnerable to storms next year. I can tell you in Dominica, number one, here it is. in this towards the center of the island. And you would know, Simone, and Lennon would know, in our central mountain range, where we call Des Bois, where you have protected areas by law. You have parks and protected areas by law. Right now, as I'm speaking to you right now, a Chinese engineering company engaged by the government using money earned from the sale of Dominica passports is digging and undermining a mountain right there, close to the same area where almost 30 years ago, an Australian mining company wanted to come and dig up those mountains to find copper. We managed to stop that one. But even as I'm speaking to you right now, this minute, somebody's there digging, and it's raining like hell in Dominica. So I don't have to tell you what's happening to the mud that's running off that site into the Pegua River, into the Crapo Hole River, and into the coastline. I don't have to tell you that. So there is a disaster. And here we are in 2025, preparing the grounds for another disaster in 2026. Who is doing it? The same people who we believe we've elected to look after our interests in terms of forest management, our interests in terms of pristine areas so that we can have a nature tourism, which we don't have, which we're destroying rapidly. So let's be clear. Unless we find a way not just to mentally integrate the idea of disasters with our idea of planning and development throughout the year, we will not make a headway. So I'm proposing we have a sample integrated development plan for Dominica that is available electronically. People in Africa are using our plan, bloody hell. And people right next door to us don't have access to that plan and could be using it as a template now to begin to pull us all together around a common integrated development plan and planning process. Because the politicians don't want that to happen, but the people need that to happen. So it's imperative that there be found somewhere in this Caribbean enough people like you have found for your panel tonight who will be bold enough, energetic enough to insist that that integrated plan becomes not just an integrated plan for Dominica, but becomes the first Caribbean integrated development plan to which we all as a people commit and have a Caribbean food plan out of it, a Caribbean nutrition plan out of it, a Caribbean tourism plan out of it, etc., etc., etc. Now, when disasters hit, we know where our own resources are. And we have a capacity to move it to the point of greatest need and extract benefit from that at minimal cost. So I'm suggesting that is the place to begin. And it can be guided by, in the Creole-speaking Caribbean, we have a term we call kudme, lending each other a hand. What you cannot do by yourself, you and your neighbors come together to do it. Kudme. The different islands have different words, lend a hand, susu, whatever. We need, once again, to go back to that and be guided by that. We don't need nobody else's ideological philosophy on which to base our development. We have it. Our ancestors have it. Ubuntu. We have it. All we need is a few people willing to put it into operation. You have a few people here from different islands. You could start something, Simone.
Oh, absolutely, and that's just the same.
That could become the core
absolutely
of a movement towards a Caribbean integrated development plan and planning process. And everything we have talked about tonight will find a home in that kind of harmonized approach to managing our space.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Athie, you very well answered my question of where do we go from here. So you've answered the question well, and I'm hoping that this is just not just a conversation, but like you said, this will be the start of a movement of an integrated approach for the Caribbean, which I know that Stronger Caribbean Together is already doing. I think Athie is having some technical difficulties. But John, let me come to you. Your final thoughts as we wind down.
Yes, when you look at the Caribbean, we are subject to volcanoes, earthquakes, tsunami, and with the climate change, hurricanes, floods, droughts. One of the most disaster-prone regions in the world. But you know what? As my fellow panelists just pointed out, we are stronger together. We have the expertise within our region, and the fact that we have gone through these experiences over the decades and more frequently recently, we have that knowledge base. And what we need to recognize is that the power lies with the people. We have the expertise, and once we can share that knowledge, and that is the philosophy of the network, Stronger Caribbean Together. We look at the experiences and we see the similarities. And quite often, the movers and shakers behind some of these issues are the same. So once we can pool our resources, understand what is taking place, then we definitely can be stronger together. Because you know what? Disasters are our reality in the past and even more so now going forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John. And before I come to you, Dorriane and Jhordan, for your final thoughts, let me just make sure I capture some of the comments on the Facebook and YouTube. Let's see. Auto718 says they have saying the U.S. military have preparing to use Dominica as a base for military operations. I am not sure what you're referring to, but that's something we could probably look into. Alvin, based on the interventions by Dorriane and John, what would be the role of civic organizations in disaster management efforts like Stronger Caribbean Together, the church, the unions, business sectors, NGO? So I think, Alvin, we can see, based on what Athie was saying, that there has to be an integrated approach where all the bodies that you mentioned will be able to make a valuable contribution. Patricia says, need respect wider range of land rights that limits power of land grabs. Greg Baptist, this politician has a lot of money to campaign, but cannot secure the people and the country. So let's take some more. Auto718, Jamaica have a lot of food and a lot of companies that sell food. Food should not be a problem. Well, I think many people are going to beg to differ on that one. You guys, always great to have you on board. Our leaders are really our problem. Alvin, great intervention, Lennon. That's where CARICOM has failed the people of the region. The changing of the mindset has to begin with an aggressive civic engagement against the amongst the people. So guys, thank you so much. Let's take one more. Patricia, let's see. Jamaica imports 60% of food. Melissa, disrupted major agricultural parishes. Farmers had not farms devastated but became homeless. The country had nutritional crisis before past Melissa will multiply. So guys, thank you so much for all the comments. Khalid, I see that you're here. Samaya, great to have you on board. Beautiful contribution. So guys, thank you so much for everything that you contributed. So let's bring Jhordan back in. So Island City Lab, what are you working on and how can we be a part of helping Jamaica recover? If you have any links that you would like us to share via this platform, we would be happy to do so. So we have about 1 minute. Well, I'll give you two, one and one.
Sure, I'll be quick with mine. I think a big thing that we're thinking about, and we are open to conversations regionally, is really rethinking what it means to adapt and to retrofit. I think the way that we think about climate adaptation in the Caribbean is very Western, right? This idea that you write a plan or that you write a building code, and then that you put in all the information in that document, and then that somehow manifests in a city or a town that is resilient. That's not how we build here. That's not how our infrastructure works. In Jamaica, about 60 to 66% of people living in homes, they built it themselves. Not necessarily brick by brick, but you hire a man to come mix some cement and to put on this room. That is how homes are built, and they're built incrementally, right? Lots of these plans and these codes are for brand new homes built by developers, right? And so I think John's point about how do you include the sort of local knowledge within practices needs to also be included in shelter, in the way that we build our homes and are putting this information locally. So someone in the questions was asking, what's the role of civic organizations? I think that can be the case. You can imagine a church having a repair camp. Come to the church once a Saturday, and we're going to talk about how do you secure your zinc roof. And so we're just having a tradesperson, a talented craftsperson talking about this is the detail you need to ensure that your roof is secure, right? That's the type of information that we need, that is decentralized, that is easily accessible, because the vast majority of us are building our homes ourselves. And so having that information, having that understanding of building techniques, of how to locate, how to move, how to understand the environment, all of that information needs to be more widely accessible. It needs to come out of the sort of academic and policy space, and it needs to be rooted in communities. And I think that is the role of civic organizations like Island City Lab, like all unions, churches, all these different organizations can take on some of that information sharing and sort of translating technical information within communities. And I think that's going to be really vital.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and thank you, Jhordan. I just shared the link that you sent me. So guys, that link is https :// support.jamaica.gov.jm. So again, you can probably just look up support.jamaica.gov.jm, and you will be able to connect to ways to support Jamaica. Because talking about disaster capitalism, it begs the question, who can you trust? Who can you trust in terms of the donations that you're sending, in terms of the non-for-profits that are showing up far and wide? Who's policing and vetting these organizations that are showing up on our islands, claiming to want to provide relief and recovery? So Jhordan, to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah, just quick on that. The Support Jamaica link is the government specific portal for donations. We can hold the government accountable. So this is the best way that I think anybody can support, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there is a process to track the money that's coming in. So it is the most accountable method. That said, it was designed by private tech companies, so we don't know what data they're collecting. So I will say use it, but be careful, or just know that it was a donated website, and we don't know what data is behind it. To the question, I think we are the best way that we can help, I think, or a systematic way that we can help is really for the entire Caribbean to start to take responsibility for each other. I mentioned it earlier, but a disaster in Dominica should be our problem, should be Jamaica's problem. A disaster in Jamaica should be Dominica's problem. If our region was more integrated and the economies were more integrated, then it would literally be everybody's problem, right? However, it is just individual segregated islands trying to fight bigger economies than we have ourselves, right? But I think we need to start to organize more unity rather than stay divided and separated. Struggle Together is an example of that. In many ways, the Caribbean tried to come together on that sort of level, kind of around disaster capitalism and its discontents. But broadly, I think if we are to survive, we need to be unified. And a hurricane is just an explosion, an example of what happens when we think only of our entity, only of our, these boundaries that are man-made and fake, when we should think about ourselves more as a territory of people with combined cultures and histories, and that we need to start thinking of, take responsibility for the development of each other, rather than we're often fighting to the bottom. It's a race to the bottom, right?
Mhm.
We're fighting over the same tourists. We're fighting over the same international funds, rather than like thinking about it as a pool that we can all participate in. So that's a structural thing that I think would help, and it would help with the knowledge sharing. But I don't want to take up more time. I know we're over time, so I think that's what I'd say.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Jhordan, and thank you, everyone. Again, we were looking at disaster capitalism, political victimization, and other challenges as the Caribbean navigates more intense natural disasters. And this program we did in partnership with Stronger Caribbean Together Network. So this is the beginning of a movement. So as you know, I like to go beyond the conversation. I do not do these programs for doing programs' sake. I look for the action that will result from this program. So I'm very grateful, and I welcome the opportunity to connect and collaborate with a Stronger Caribbean Together Network. As you know, this program is all about creating strategic alliances for the sustainable development of our Caribbean region and our worldwide Caribbean diaspora. So I think this is the perfect opportunity as we look forward to 2026. I know that we already have another program lined up on food security in the Caribbean region. So we're looking forward to how we can bring our experts together so that we can do the work for the sustainable development of the Caribbean. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel who joined us today, Lennon Mathieu, Athie, Dorriane from Island City Lab, and Jhordan, as well as John out there in Barbuda. I want to thank you for your valuable contribution. Lambi, thank you for being on the console. Our listeners on Q95, our worldwide audience of listeners on Q95 FM radio, as well as on YouTube and Facebook. And guys, don't forget, if you missed any portion of the program, if you tuned in late, you can always catch the replay on Facebook on Push Past 10 or on Q95 FM radio, or on YouTube at Q95 FM radio. So don't forget to share this program, because we are looking for that integrated approach to so many of the issues that we're facing in the Caribbean. And it is through you sharing this program that we will be able to invite even more experts and more voices to the conversation, and more hands to do the work from these conversations. So as always, it was wonderful to be here with you for another episode of Roots Connections on Q95 FM radio. I am your host, Dr. Simone Mathieu. I look forward to being in your company. I think our next program is going to be on December 10th. So I'm looking forward to being in your company at that time. Until then, if you as well, you're working on something that is important to the sustainable development of Dominica and the Caribbean region, you can always reach me at pushpast10@gmail.com. So that is pushpast10@gmail.com. And so with that, we say thank you, Alvin, Margot, everyone who chimed in the discussion. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Good night, and have a wonderful rest of your week. If you're here in the US, happy Thanksgiving. Don't overeat. Have a happy Thanksgiving. And guys, I look forward to engaging with you on another discussion in the not too distant future. So thank you, and have a good night. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Landy.
Roots Connections on Q. 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. every other Wednesday on Q95, the big station. Dominicans journeyed beyond our shores for decades in search of economic opportunities and educational advancement. Many are ready to give back to their cherished nature island. Welcome to Roots Connections on Q. Join